I never thought betrayal could come from the people I sacrificed everything for. Last year, I drained my savings, $60,000, to save my parents' house. I told myself, family is forever, money will come back. But then, I found out they had erased me from their will and left everything to my sister. A month later, my mother texted me, "Mortgage is due." My hands shook as I typed back, "Ask the heir." That was the moment my blind loyalty shattered, and my war for justice began. I still remember the night I wired the $60,000. My savings account balance dropped to nearly zero as the confirmation screen blinked in front of me. My chest tightened, but I whispered to myself, "It's worth it. They need me. Family comes first." I pictured my parents' relief, the way they would hug me when the house was saved, the gratitude in their voices. For years, I had been the reliable one, the daughter who answered late-night calls, who paid emergency bills, who never said no. This, I believed, would finally prove my loyalty. The next morning, I drove to their house. My mother kissed me quickly on the cheek, barely making eye contact, while my father muttered a distracted "thank you." The moment lasted seconds before my sister appeared, holding a mug of coffee as though she owned the space. They all sat at the kitchen table, flipping through papers about property taxes and insurance. I waited for a word of appreciation, some acknowledgement of what I had just done. Instead, I overheard my mother say, "Well, at least now we don't have to worry about refinancing. We can start thinking about how to protect the house for the future." My sister nodded, adding, "It should stay in the family line. You know what I mean." They spoke in half-coded language, excluding me, as if I weren't standing right there. I forced a smile, telling myself not to read too much into it. Gratitude doesn't always look like a Hallmark card. Still, a knot tightened in my stomach. I had expected tears, hugs, maybe even a family dinner in my honor. What I got instead was the unsettling sense that I had only reset the cycle. I give, they take. I sacrifice, they move on. I swallowed hard and drove home, convincing myself I had done the right thing. At least the house is safe, I thought. At least they'll see I'm reliable. Weeks later, the truth began to peel back, like wallpaper hiding rot. One evening, while helping my father fix his laptop, I noticed his messaging app open on the screen. I wasn't trying to snoop. I just saw my name highlighted in a thread titled "Family Future." Curiosity tugged at me before guilt could stop me. My eyes scanned the messages. It was a group chat, just my parents and my sister. My heart sank instantly. The conversation stretched back months, and I realized with horror that I had never been part of it. "Rachel worries too much about money," my sister had written. "She should focus on her own life. We can't depend on her forever," my father replied. "She'll be fine," my mother chimed in. "She always bounces back. But when it comes to the house, we should make sure it stays where it belongs." And then the line that burned itself into my mind. Rachel should be supported only when necessary, but she doesn't need to inherit anything. That would just complicate things. I froze in front of the glowing screen, the words blurring. My breath grew shallow, supported only when necessary, as if I were some outsider to be tossed scraps, not a daughter who had just given up nearly every dollar she had to keep a roof over their heads. I felt the room spinning, the faint hum of the laptop growing louder. My father returned, and I quickly minimized the window, pretending I hadn't seen anything. but inside, my heart was cracking. Driving home that night, I kept replaying the words. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. A war raged inside me, denial fighting with truth, love battling betrayal. I wanted to believe I had misread it, that context was missing, that parents don't talk about their children that way. But deep down, I knew better. The betrayal didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, wrapped in casual text bubbles and polite dismissals. It was a knife slipped between my ribs while I was still holding out my hand in love. And yet, part of me still wanted to excuse it. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe they didn't mean it. That's the trap of blind loyalty. You bend reality until it breaks you. But that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake one thought. If they could cut me out of their future plans, what else had they already taken from me? Rachel believed she had saved the family. But in the shadows, a different plan had already been written. One that erased her from their story. It happened by accident, the way life-changing moments often do. I had gone back to my parents' house to help my mother organize some old documents in the study. She was out running errands, and I was left alone with dusty boxes and a heavy oak cabinet. I wasn't searching for secrets. I wasn't hunting for betrayal. I just wanted to prove to myself that I was still a good daughter. But when I pulled open the drawer, I noticed a small black safe tucked in the back. The key was already in the lock, as though fate had left the door open for me. Something in me hesitated. I shouldn't pry, but my curiosity was heavier than my guilt. I turned the key. Inside, a stack of legal papers. I pulled one out, unfolded it, and felt the ground tilt beneath me. It was the will, my parents' will. And there, in bold letters, was my sister's name, listed as sole heir. Every asset, every account, every piece of property. My name, once printed neatly alongside hers, had been scratched out. Erased. I stared at the black ink line slashing through me, as though I were a mistake. My vision blurred. My pulse pounded so loudly, I could hear it echoing in my ears. I read it again, hoping I had misinterpreted, hoping it was a draft, hoping it was temporary. But it was final. It was legal. I sank into the leather chair, clutching the paper so tightly it crumpled. My hands trembled as I whispered, how could they, after everything? I thought of the $60,000 I had poured into their mortgage, the years of answering their calls at midnight, the birthdays I spent alone while I sent gifts to them, and still I was the expendable one. When my mother returned, I quickly slid the papers back into the safe, locking it with shaking fingers. She didn't notice my red eyes, or maybe she didn't care. She walked past me, humming softly, carrying grocery bags, while my world had just been split open. Driving home, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. My heart kept racing, skipping beats, then slamming back into rhythm like a drum. Betrayal didn't just sting, it hollowed me out. I was no longer a daughter. I was a donor, a bank account, a background character in the story of their lives. Rachel thought that shock was the end, but one more blow was still waiting. A month later, the message arrived. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and cold. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. I opened it casually, expecting maybe a reminder about some trivial family matter. But the words on the screen cut deeper than any knife. Mortgage is due, just 3 words, as if the $60,000 had never existed, as if I were still on call, their personal emergency fund. My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I typed back. For once, I didn't soften my words. For once, I didn't beg for recognition. I wrote, "Ask the air." I stared at the message, then pressed send. My chest burned as though fire was crawling up my throat. For a moment, I felt something close to power, but it didn't last. Seconds later, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't 3 words. It was a storm. My mother's reply spilled across the screen, paragraphs of rage and guilt-tripping. "You're ungrateful. You're cruel. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You will regret turning your back on your own blood." I couldn't breathe. The tears came before I could stop them. My chest heaved, my shoulders shaking. I curled on the couch, clutching the phone, reading and rereading the accusations. Words I had never imagined hearing from my own mother now branded themselves into my skin. Ungrateful, cruel traitor. I pressed the phone to my chest and sobbed. This wasn't the triumphant moment I had imagined when I finally said no. This was heartbreak. For the first time, the mask cracked. The loyal daughter, the silent savior, was gone, and in her place was a woman broken wide open. Hours passed before the tears dried. I sat in the quiet, staring at the ceiling, my body heavy, my mind numb. I realized that my mother didn't see me as a daughter anymore. She saw me as disobedient property, a resource she could no longer control. And then another thought came, sharper than the rest. If love can be erased by money, was it ever love at all? You tell me, have you ever been called a traitor by the very people you've spent your life saving, just because you finally said no? The morning after my mother's attack messages, I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a decision. I could keep playing the part of the obedient daughter, or I could finally become something else, a strategist. My tears had dried, leaving behind a hollow determination. If my family saw me as an outsider, then I would act like one. No longer naive, no longer vulnerable. The first step was evidence. I opened my laptop and began digging through my bank records. The $60,000 transfer glared back at me like a wound. I downloaded every statement, highlighting the exact day the money left my account, and entered theirs. It wasn't just numbers, it was proof. Next came the text messages. I scrolled back months, capturing every plea for help, every just this once promise, every guilt-laden demand. Screenshots filled a folder on my desktop, timestamps, dollar amounts, even the emojis my mother used when she pretended to be grateful. Each file felt like another brick in a wall. I was finally building for myself, not against myself. But the hardest moment came when I replayed the conversation I had secretly recorded weeks before. I hadn't meant to become a recorder of my own family's cruelty, but something in me had known I might need it. My mother's voice crackled through the speakers. "Your sister is the one who deserves everything. Rachel, well, she'll manage. She always does." I paused the playback, my throat tightening. "Deserve everything." Those 2 words hung heavy in the air. I saved the file, labeled it Evidence A, and whispered to myself, "This time I won't let them erase me." Days turned into weeks as I pieced together a mosaic of betrayal. I didn't lash out, didn't confront. Instead, I watched, waited, gathered. Strategy replaced desperation. Each document, each message became armor against the people who had taught me never to need armor in the first place. And yet, even with all I had collected, I sensed something was missing. I needed more than proof of their cruelty. I needed perspective, validation from outside the circle. I didn't know it then, but the most powerful evidence wouldn't come from my parents. It would come from someone I least expected. One Sunday afternoon, as I returned from the grocery store, I found a note tucked under my apartment door. It was written in neat cursive, addressed simply, Rachel. Inside, a single line. I know what they did to you. Please call me. Aunt Margaret, my mother's younger sister. We hadn't spoken in years. Growing up, she was always the quiet relative, the one who visited less and disappeared quickly after family gatherings. My parents dismissed her as unstable or difficult, and I had believed them until that moment. I called her. Her voice cracked as she answered. Rachel, I should have spoken to you sooner. I know what you're going through. Because they did the same thing to me. We met at a small diner on the edge of town. She clasped my hands across the table, eyes shimmering with the weight of her own history. She told me that decades ago, after their parents died, my mother and father manipulated the inheritance. What should have been split fairly among siblings was quietly redirected. My aunt was left with scraps while my mother gained control of property and accounts. I thought I was the only one, I whispered, my throat tightening. You're not, she said firmly. They've always had a way of twisting loyalty into leverage. You gave them money, just like I gave them trust, and both of us were erased. Her words sent a chill through me. The betrayal wasn't an accident or a single misstep. It was a pattern, generational, deliberate, sharpened over years. For the first time in months, I felt something other than rage or despair. I felt clarity. The problem wasn't me. It was never me. That night, I lay awake, but not from heartbreak. This time, I felt a strange strength blooming inside me. Knowing I wasn't alone, that someone else had lived through the same manipulations, shifted the weight I carried. It didn't make the betrayal easier, but it made me feel less invisible. If my parents could betray their own sibling, if they could cut her out of her rightful inheritance, then why had I ever believed I would be safe? Why had I trusted they would treat me differently? And here's the question I can't stop asking. If your parents can betray their own blood, their own sister, would you ever trust them to protect you? The snow fell in slow, heavy flakes that Christmas Eve, covering the driveway in white silence. My parents' house glowed with warm lights, wreaths hung neatly on the windows, and the smell of roasted ham drifted out as soon as I opened the door. It looked perfect, as if betrayal couldn't possibly live in a place dressed for holiday cheer. Inside, my sister greeted me with a smile that felt like sharpened glass. You made it, she said, handing me a glass of wine, as though nothing had happened. My parents sat by the fireplace, chatting with cousins and uncles, their laughter echoing through the living room. No one knew what was about to happen. No one knew I had come armed. I sat quietly through dinner, watching them. My mother telling jokes, my father retelling old stories, my sister leaning in, close to relatives, her laughter louder than everyone else's. They performed the image of family so well I almost believed it myself. Almost. But beneath the clinking glasses and Christmas music, my chest tightened with the weight of everything I had gathered. Tonight, masks would fall. When dessert was served, I stood up. The room stilled, conversations halting mid-sentence. I'd like to share something, I said, my voice calm though my heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. I picked up the remote, pointed it at the flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, and pressed play. The screen lit up with a screenshot of my bank transfer, $60,000. Gasps filled the room. My parents' eyes widened. My sister's smile faltered. I clicked again, showing text messages begging me for help, promises that this would be the last time. Then the cruel reply, after I finally said no. "You erased me," I said softly, but the microphone in my chest made every word feel thunderous. "You took my savings and then you took my name out of your will. I saved your house, but I wasn't worth a line in your future." My sister shot up from her chair, her voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. She's twisting everything. Rachel's just trying to make herself the victim again." A murmur spread across the room. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at me with wide eyes. My mother tried to stand, wringing her hands. "Rachel, sweetheart, you don't understand." But my sister cut her off, raising her voice. "She wanted this. She offered the money to make herself look good. She thrives on pity. Don't you see? She's always needed attention. This," she pointed at the TV, "this is her performance." Her words sliced through the room, trying to flip the script, to paint me as the manipulator. For a moment, silence wrapped around me. My chest heaved. I almost faltered, but I steadied myself. "If I wanted attention," I said quietly, "I wouldn't have kept your betrayal hidden this long." The tension was thick, every pair of eyes darting between me and my sister. I clicked the remote again. The next file played, an audio recording. My mother's voice filled the room, unmistakable and cold. "Your sister is the one who deserves everything. Rachel, well, she'll manage. She always does." The effect was immediate. A gasp broke from an ant sitting near the tree. My father's face drained of color. My mother clutched the edge of the table, whispering, "Oh my God!" The room turned electric. My sister tried to laugh, too loud, too forced. "That's taken out of context. You don't know the full story." But before she could finish, a voice rose from the back of the room. It was Uncle Peter, my father's older cousin, a man who rarely spoke at gatherings. He stood, his expression grave. "I've heard them say it too. I overheard your parents last year, talking about how to cut you out. They said you were just a safety net. Nothing more." A hush fell over the room. My sister's face went pale. My mother's lips trembled. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again, no words forming. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply let the silence do the work. My body trembled not from weakness, but from the enormity of finally speaking out. For years, I had swallowed every insult, every manipulation. Now the words were no longer mine alone. They were shared, heard, undeniable. The accusations came quickly after. My sister hissed, "You're destroying this family." My mother sobbed, "Rachel, how could you humiliate us like this?" My father sat frozen, saying nothing. And then came the whispers from relatives, the shifting of loyalties, the dawning realization that the image of harmony had been a lie. I stepped back, hands trembling, chest heaving. I wasn't the ruthless avenger they painted me to be. I was human, shaking, vulnerable, terrified, but I refused to back down. My eyes stung with tears I fought to hold back. "I didn't destroy this family," I whispered. "You did, the moment you decided my loyalty was worth less than your greed." The room erupted, voices colliding, but I stayed silent. I had said enough. The evidence, the recordings, the truth, they carried more weight than any accusation they could throw back. I let them spin in the chaos, their defenses unraveling in front of everyone. And for the first time, I felt something close to freedom. Rachel hadn't played her final card yet. The days after Christmas spread like cracks in glass. Whispers traveled faster than snowmelt. And by New Year's Eve, the perfect image my parents had cultivated for decades had already begun to collapse. Relatives who once adored my sister now avoided her calls. Friends who had praised my parents' generosity grew distant after hearing the recording. At Sunday service, people glanced at them with curiosity edged in judgment. For the first time, I wasn't the one carrying the shame. They were. Then Aunt Margaret, the one who had reached out to me weeks before, decided she had stayed silent long enough. She met me at my apartment, a thick manila folder in her hands. "It's time people know everything," she said, sliding the papers across my table. Inside were bank records and property deeds from 30 years ago, documents proving how my mother and father had manipulated their own parents' estate. Margaret had been tricked out of her share, her inheritance swallowed by the very people who had raised me. I stared at the documents, my hands trembling. "They did the same thing to you." "They did it to more than just me," she replied grimly. "There are others in this family who never spoke up. You were their latest target, but not their first." The realization hit like a wave. My parents' betrayal wasn't a single act of cruelty. It was a cycle, a machine they had perfected, powered by silence and guilt. My $60,000 was only another installment in a long history of stolen trust. When Margaret told her story at a small family gathering, others began to step forward. A cousin mentioned how my parents had borrowed money temporarily years ago and never repaid it. An uncle admitted he'd been pressured into signing away rights to a piece of land. Every voice cracked open another piece of the facade, and together they painted a picture of two people who had spent their lives siphoning loyalty from those who loved them. It was no longer just Rachel against her family. It was an entire branch of relatives, realizing they had all been victims in one way or another. A chain reaction of truth. But the most devastating blow was still to come. My lawyer filed the paperwork 2 weeks later. The claim was simple but devastating. Restitution for the $60,000 I had given under false pretenses, plus damages for intentional emotional harm. With the evidence folder I had built, bank records, text messages, the will, the audio recordings, the case was airtight. My parents, once so confident in their control, now faced the terrifying possibility of losing not just their reputation, but their finances. Court summons arrived like unwelcome guests, and soon their whispers of defense turned into frantic phone calls with their own attorney. As for my sister, the fallout was swift. Word spread quickly through her professional and social circles. Colleagues who once admired her success now eyed her with suspicion. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone accused of manipulating her own sister out of an inheritance. The invitations stopped. The applause ceased. She had wanted everything, and now she had nothing but disgrace. Meanwhile, I sat in my tiny apartment, watching it unfold from a distance. Some nights I laughed at the irony, justice moving like a storm I had only nudged into motion. Other nights, the tears still came, hot and heavy, because even justice couldn't fill the void left by the loss of a family I once believed in. One evening, I sat cross-legged on the floor, documents spread around me like puzzle pieces. A cup of tea, cooled at my side. My chest ached, but for the first time in months, I breathed without fear. A laugh bubbled out of me, followed by tears, until I sat rocking gently, laughing and crying at once. It wasn't joy, it wasn't sorrow. It was something in between, the release that comes when truth no longer hides in shadows. And yet, as I wiped my face and stared out the window at the city lights, a question gnawed at me. Justice had been served, at least in part, but it came with a cost. Tell me, does justice taste as sweet when it means losing your family forever? I packed my things into boxes one rainy afternoon. The sound of water against the windows, a quiet drumbeat, marking the end of one life and the start of another. I didn't leave much behind, just old photographs I couldn't bear to look at, and the keys to a house that had never truly been home. My new apartment sat 2 hours away, in a city where no one knew my history, where my last name meant nothing. The first night, I unpacked slowly. Books on one shelf, clothes in one drawer, my grandmother's teacups on the counter. For the first time in years, there were no late-night calls interrupting me, no urgent texts demanding more. Just silence. I boiled water, poured it over a bag of chamomile, and sat by the window. The city lights blinked far below. I held the mug in both hands and simply breathed. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't cinematic. It was peace, a fragile, trembling peace that made my throat tighten with something dangerously close to hope. Days stretched into weeks. I blocked numbers, muted email addresses, closed the door on anyone trying to drag me back into that house of ghosts. At first, guilt gnawed at me, guilt planted by years of conditioning. But slowly, with every ignored call, every deleted message, the guilt dulled. Boundaries weren't cruelty, they were survival. And yet, something unexpected was waiting for me beyond that silence. I met Daniel at a small cafe near my office. He was kind in ways that didn't feel transactional, patient in ways that didn't make me suspicious. He listened, not to respond, not to manipulate, but simply to understand. When I told him pieces of my story, he didn't flinch or offer platitudes. He just said, "You didn't deserve that." 4 words that felt like stitches pulling my torn edges together. We began seeing each other regularly, slowly building something steady. For the first time, love didn't feel like walking on glass. It felt like standing barefoot on warm grass, steady, safe, real. Meanwhile, my career flourished. Free from the constant drain of financial sabotage, I redirected my energy into projects I had once abandoned. Promotions followed, then new opportunities. My bank account grew not because I hoarded money, but because I finally held it without fear of someone stealing it. Freedom had a taste, not sweet, but solid. One night, scrolling through my phone, I noticed something surprising. My story, screenshots, the phrase "ask the air," had started circulating online. Strangers debated it, some calling me ruthless, others calling me brave. The hashtag #AskTheAir trended briefly. A banner for anyone who had ever been used, betrayed, erased by their own family. I read messages from people across the country. I thought I was the only one. Your story gave me the courage to say no. You made me realize family isn't supposed to hurt like that. Each comment pressed gently against the scars I carried, reminding me that pain can be repurposed, that wounds can be turned into warnings for others. But the real twist came when I realized I wasn't content to let the story stop there. I began writing. Late at night, I sat at my desk, the lamp spilling warm light over pages filled with my voice, my truth, not just my betrayal, but the strategies I used to survive it. Gathering evidence, setting boundaries, finding allies, reclaiming myself. At first, it was only for me, a way to map the wreckage of my past. But as the chapters formed, I knew it was bigger than me. It was a guidebook for anyone trapped in the same cycle. A way to break free from toxic families without losing yourself in the process. And so the book took shape. A title scribbled at the top of the page, Ask the Heir. As I wrote the final chapter, I realized something. My family had taken my money, my inheritance, even my place in their story. But what they couldn't take was my ability to create a new story of my own. One where I wasn't erased, but reborn. I leaned back, closed my notebook, and felt the weight of everything lift. I hadn't just survived them. I had built something beyond them, something untouchable. Not survival, not revenge, transformation. I had been erased from their will, but I had written myself into a future where no one could ever erase me again.